this afternoon to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Cassandra McCall. And she is a postdoctoral research associate in the Engineering Education Department at Virginia Tech. And Dr. McCall earned her bachelor's and her master's degrees in civil engineering from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology and her PhD in engineering education from Virginia Tech. Her dissertation research focused on the utilization of grounded theory methods to create a theoretical model of professional identity formation for undergraduate students that captures the way in which students internalize the values, skills, and behaviors of the civil engineering profession. Dr. McCall has since expanded her work to explore the identity formation of civil engineering students who experience disability. So without further ado, I think we should welcome Dr. McCall.
Well, thank you so much, Ian, and thank you guys all for being here today. It's really exciting to see so many people interested in this work. It's definitely been a journey, so I've been working on this project for a little over a year now. As I was putting this workshop together, I was reflecting on everything, and it's like, wow, I've learned so much in the last year. So before we get started, I wanted to thank Dr. Wosu, Dr. Allen, and Natalia for inviting me to come speak. I'm very excited to share this work with all of you. As you came in, there's a worksheet that you have. We're going to be filling that out iteratively throughout the talk. I apologize if the text is small. I passed it by my graduate students, and they were like, "This is fine," and I was like, I can't see this, but if you guys can, I think it'll be okay. But if there's anything that you need, if you need a bigger version, I can definitely email that to you guys afterwards. I also have business cards, so if you want to contact me after the talk, feel free to grab one of those and we can get a dialogue going. So throughout the workshop, with that worksheet, it is pretty interactive. If you guys have questions, just let me know. I am partially blind, so I might not necessarily see you right away. So Natalia's going to help me with people raising hands and things like that, just so you're aware. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about myself. So I grew up in Edgemont, South Dakota, which is a really tiny town of 900 people. It's a ranching and railroading town. So growing up, if you would have asked me what an engineer was, I would have told you that it was someone who drove a train. I have family members that work in the railroading industry and things. So that's pretty big out there. So my knowledge of engineering to begin with was fairly limited. My dad built a lot of buildings out on our ranch, so I would help him with that. A lot of hands-on experience I got from him, working in the field, putting up barns, things like that. And so that was where I kind of got interested in structures and architecture. I watched a lot of HGTV, a lot of Property Brothers, things like that. And he was like, you're really good at math and science. And he was pretty pragmatic about encouraging me to go into engineering. And so he's like, maybe you should try this engineering thing. And I was like, okay. So off to undergrad I went. So I did my undergraduate at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. It's a tiny PUI, predominantly undergraduate institution. There's 2,500 undergraduates that go there approximately. Very few PhDs, very few master students, particularly when I was there. They since have grown. But throughout my undergrad, I went through all these classes, all these activities, and I just kind of had this feeling that I wasn't, like I could do it, but I didn't quite fit in. And then my senior year, at the end, I got an application from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and it was basically an insurance package. Like, if you design this thing and it fails, you're not liable for such and such amount, or the big one was like people dying, and 22-year-old me panicked and realized the full extent of the responsibility of civil engineering, because I didn't know really anything about it before I went into school. Then during my master's program, that was really when I started to get into engineering education research. So I worked on an engineering education grant that was co-sponsored through the civil engineering and industrial engineering departments, sponsored by the National Science Foundation. I was the first student at SDSM&T to do an engineering education-based thesis. So I was kind of a guinea pig. My advisor would come out and be like, we had a department meeting about you today. Because I was taking all these civil engineering classes, and it was the whole conversation of how do you do an engineering education thesis and have a master's in civil engineering? So I ended up overcompensating for that by taking all the structural engineering classes I could, and decided I'd write the thesis anyway, and if they didn't accept it, I'd do a coursework master's through there. But everything worked out, and I have that thesis in the civil engineering department. That was looking at faculty mentoring programs. After my master's, I worked for a year and a half as a research engineer in the industrial and systems engineering department. Continuing that work on faculty mentoring, I started teaching, I started helping to advise graduate students, and that's where I was like, okay, I think this engineering education thing is for me. So then I went to Virginia Tech to pursue my PhD. As Deanna mentioned, I got my PhD in May 2017, and the outcome of that really long sentence that I made her read at the beginning is this figure. I don't expect you to read everything that's in this figure, but my entire dissertation is focused around this. Basically, what this figure captures in terms of identity formation is that students have a sense of self, and then they also have a definition of the profession. And throughout their undergraduate careers, they go through all these experiences, interact with all these people, and that influences the type of negotiations that they conduct, essentially, to remain balanced or unbalanced with the profession. So sometimes that's in the form of accepting or rejecting information, like, I'm a structures person, I hate water, I don't care, don't tell me anything about water. Like, taking that perspective in their classes. It's okay if I do poorly in this class because I'm not going to need it anyway. So basically, if any one of those definitions get extremely out of whack with one another, I had a student go through this. She had an identity crisis where at first she wanted to be a chemical engineer and ended up transferring into civil engineering, but she was like, I'm going to have to sit in a lab all day, and I'm a sociable person, and that's just not going to work. And so basically her sophomore year of college, she had to redefine herself, because since 7th grade, she was going to go into chemical engineering, and she was going to be a chemical engineer. So basically then, when she kind of reestablished herself, figured out her career goals, she entered into the civil engineering profession, or major, excuse me. So now the work that we're doing on the grant that I'm going to talk to you about today is expanding this. During my dissertation, three out of the 32 students I interviewed disclosed a disability to me. I was not anticipating this. And so as someone also going through transitions with my own disability, we talked a lot about accommodations. We talked a lot about just experiences in general. And so their interviews, while they're embedded in this overall model, their experiences were a lot different. And so we wanted to dig into those more, and then that was the impetus for the grant that I'm currently working on. So if you guys want, we can go ahead and, if you want to grab food now, since that's here and set up, you can do that if you want. Otherwise, we'll also have an activity break here in a second, so if you guys want to wait and get up, then that's totally understandable too. I just don't want to be the one to keep you from food. So one of the underlying frameworks or sensitizing concept that we call ungrounded theory was the multiple dimensions of identity model by Jones and McEwen. And one of the things that they really focus on is that you have this core sense of self, your values, who you are, and then you have all of these dimensions that move around that based on the context that you're in. So gender, sexual orientation, religion, there's been work on that, socioeconomic status, or a professional identity, being an engineer, is another aspect of that. So then we get into kind of the salience of those. And so as basically these molecules on this atom move closer to the nucleus, that aspect of your identity becomes more salient. So basically you communicate these in I am phrases. So like, I am a woman, I am white, I'm a wife, I'm a sister. And one of the interesting things was, I was going through this with my husband, and he was like, you're a twin, and you don't have this on here. I was like, oh, I haven't talked to my twin in a really long time. But I had talked to my little sister, so that was really fresh in my mind. So really a lot of these identities that become salient to you become salient in different contexts and in different events throughout your life. So now what I wanted you guys to do in that first upper left box of your worksheet is just think about some of your own identities. What identities do you have? Also, as a precursor, you're not required to share these. This is a pretty personal topic we're talking about. So don't expect that you're going to be sharing these with people. So I want you to write down what speaks to you on your sheet, and we'll continue talking throughout the session. All right, does everybody have a good list at least started? Okay, cool. You can come back to this, and I hope you do, and we will eventually at the end of the workshop. So as you look at your list, so just kind of review what you have on here. And as we go through these, there's these characteristics that kind of bind our different identities together. So it can be suddenly or gradually acquired. So like, for example, I'm a wife. 4 months ago, I was not a wife, I was a fiance instead. So that was something that was sudden. As someone who studies identity, sometimes these shifts, it doesn't make them any easier sometimes. You still go through those growing pains of sudden identity changes. And then they also can be granted to you by institutions. So I have a PhD. I can't just go around and just randomly have a PhD. Someone has to grant that authority in me to do different things throughout the university setting. And then also for social dimensions of identity, they need to be engaged and enacted by you, but they also need to be recognized by others. So an example that my grad students gave me, they were like, it's like socioeconomic status and keeping up with the Joneses, like to show people, back in the day, like to show people I'm like upper middle class, I have to buy all the things that this prominent upper middle class family bought. So really trying to communicate and prove to other people what identity dimension that is. And throughout the presentation, I want you guys to think about what that means in terms of what these different identities mean to you, particularly for students with disabilities, and how that's enacted or what that looks like. So again, these are particularly relevant when you're trying to belong to a member of a group. That's a construct of social identity. So now I wanted to take a few minutes in your next box and just think about, what do you know about disability? So are there any keywords or phrases that come to mind? Anything that you've seen? What do you typically think of when you think of disability? And even how it's talked about in society. I have hands, yes?
Some require accommodations.
Okay, some require accommodations. Yeah.
So could it be, does it have to be a physical disability, or can you also think of mental disability?
That is a great question, and yes to all of it. Yeah. And that's a really good point to the accommodations question. You know, how do we have accommodations for these different groups of students? You guys are already like way ahead of me in terms of presentation, so this is great. So really quick while you guys are finishing up, just to kind of I'm going to step out of the light so I can actually see you. How many of you are grad students? Okay, faculty, staff? Okay, cool. So we got a good mix of people. So one of the things that, and for some of you, if you're staff and you know a lot about these accommodations, these are going to be very familiar to you. So these are kind of different ways that we've been looking at it. So in our study, so we have Americans with Disabilities, which kind of takes an institutional focus, and then lately I've really been diving into a lot of the disability studies literature, which really focuses on the individual. If you guys don't mind sharing, what kind of things triggered your thoughts on disability that you put on your sheet? Yeah.
I said visible and non-visible.
Visible and non-visible? Cool. Any others? Yeah. Okay, yeah, in the back. What?
So I said that there still seems to be a stigma around disability, and people just aren't accustomed to it still. The world still isn't quite there yet.
Okay.
For both mental or physical.
Okay. Awesome. These are great. You guys are hitting on all these things that I'm going to be talking about. Oh, is there one more?
It's time consuming.
Can you explain that?
So people that experience disabilities have to kind of give a little bit of time, and someone who doesn't have that, which causes troubles in and out of the academics.
Okay. So the time constraints around management. Okay, cool. So you guys are fairly knowledgeable about this, so I'm not going to go into grave detail on what Americans with Disabilities Act, what it is. But really kind of the big thing is that institutional perspective. So it helps us identify institutionally who has a disability and who doesn't. And so this can be, I mean, in going through this, so while I've been analyzing a lot of the interviews I've been conducting with students in this study, I go back to this definition and I get really frustrated by it because it's so vague and complex. But one thing it does do is it does recognize that enactment of identity and recognition of identity. So, and so particularly with a person who is perceived as having such an impairment. So then we also have kind of this more individual aspect of disability. If you don't have this book, it's called Keywords for Disability Studies. It's really fascinating. I definitely recommend it. Basically what it is it's all these ways about how we talk about disability and the history of that. So anything from like eugenics to blindness to mobility, anything related to disability studies is in this book. So I definitely recommend it. But here they have a similar definition, but it also kind of focuses back on society and how individuals with disabilities interact. So disability composes of a broad range of bodily, cognitive, and sensory differences and capacities. It is more fluid than most other forms of identities, particularly because it can happen to anyone at any time. So if you've ever had a surgery, I had a knee surgery where I couldn't walk for 9 months. So I had a temporary handicap permit. And that was kind of one big thing that I was just like, man, our campus is terrible. Like, I can't get around here at all. And that was even just a short-term a short-term disability for me. And so thinking about then too, you know, for individuals like you commented on time, the time it takes to navigate all these accessible areas and what those look like it can take a lot of time. And so here you can see where it's really focused on the individual and how they interact with all these institutions. So before we move on, particularly if you're in the disability office, here you will probably recognize this, how we talk about disability. So there's person-first language, which emphasizes the value and worth of the individuals, what people who really support this form of language, that's one of the big things that they really adhere to. So example of that would be a person with autism, a person with a disability, or a person, you know, insert an identity there. And then there's also identity-first language. We have a researcher at Virginia Tech who uses this a lot, and that's putting the identity first. This is particularly debated in the autism community because a lot of people with autism, they say, I'm an autistic person. You can't separate my autism from me. That's who I am. And so it can get really complex. I was watching Kamau Bell's United Shades of America. I don't know if you guys have seen that on CNN. And he had an episode on people with disabilities on there. And there was a woman, based on her disease that she was describing, it was the same one I had, just a more progressed version of it. And he said, do you consider yourself a disabled person? And she was like, no, I hate that term. And I was like, oh, okay, good to know. Like, I don't know if that would necessarily bother me, but it does bother her. So it can get very complex. Typically, when I speak, I use person-first language. I tend to find that's more inclusive. We have an amputee who works on our research grant as a co-PI. She would say she's a disabled person. So she very clearly identifies with that identity. So now we're getting back into what you guys were talking about in terms of the diversity of disability. In engineering education, we tend to group students with disabilities or faculty with disabilities or people with disabilities in one homogeneous group. And as you guys know, this is not the reality. And so what a lot of our work is doing now is really bringing that to the fore in what we're talking about, particularly in engineering education. So right now we're seeing diversity along primarily these three dimensions of type, you know, whether it's cognitive, developmental, there's mental health disabilities, and then also going into apparentness, whether you can see it or not, which you guys had mentioned, and then the presence. Is it continuous or intermittent? So with my eye disease, I have blind spots where cells in my eyes have died, so I can't see anything. But it also varies based on light. So right now, my vision's fairly poor looking at you from this angle, but if I come over here, I can see all of you a lot better, even though some of you have like parts of your face missing, you know, and things like that. So it really varies based on the environment that I'm in. When we typically think about disabilities, we typically think about these three things. And particularly the students in my study, even those who don't have apparent disabilities, you know, they always go to something they can see. And that's natural to us. You know, you can see that I'm white, you can see that I'm a woman. And so how we enact those identities is highly important, going back to that enactment. But here, you know, if you can't see the disability, it tends to make things a lot harder and stuff. So yeah, so that's typically what we think of. And so this is, this is some participant that we have in our study now. This is Madison. She's a senior in civil engineering, and she has Lyme's disease. And she was diagnosed with it her freshman year of college. They didn't know what it was for a really long time. And so So she had a really difficult time figuring out what it was. For her, it's primarily physical. She gets a lot of joint pain. It's not apparent. You can't tell. She's pretty mobile. So like walking along, like when she came into her interview, I couldn't tell because she could walk in. She didn't have a wheelchair or anything. And so for her, it was kind of an invisible disability. And it's also intermittent. So one of the things was she talked about how one semester she drove to class every day because it was just too painful to walk. So when she tried to walk, she'd said, I'd leave my house like 45 minutes before my class started so I could take time walking there. And then eventually I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. So for her, that was a significant physical disability. But then on the other hand, she also has a cognitive dimension of it as well. And so typically when we think about individuals with disabilities, we see them as like, sometimes we see them as like all-encompassing, where because someone has a physical disability, you assume they have a cognitive disability or vice versa. Like sometimes if I can't see things very well, people are like, well, let me just shove it right in your face. It's like, no, that's, or let me talk to you slower. It's like, no, I just can't see the greatest. I can hear okay, although my husband would tell you I cannot hear very well. Maybe some selective hearing in there. But anyway, so with Madison, she talks about kind of the pressure that she gets, particularly when doing presentations. So we talk in engineering a lot about communication and how that's important. And she was telling me about, she gets a lot of anxiety around presentations because here you're being assessed on how well you can communicate something, and then she's like, what if I forget the word? So here she's like, that's a very common symptom, is saying the wrong word, then not realizing you've said the wrong word and trying to get something out, and you can't think of the right word and stuff. And she's just like, I dread having to give presentations. And so that's also kind of, on certain days that happens. So it's intermittent. So sometimes as faculty, particularly when you have students talking about these things to you, it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around because it's not an all or nothing, and it's not an ever-present thing all the time. And so a lot of what the presentation and the stories that I'm sharing just is to really hit this home as to what these students are going through, how all these different students can have all these different combinations. We have students with all these different combinations in our study. The majority of them, however, have disclosed depression and anxiety and ADHD are kind of the three major ones. Although we do have, we recently enrolled someone who was just diagnosed with narcolepsy. When we were talking, I was like, is that like, I said, this is gonna sound like a really bad question, but is it like in the movies where someone just falls asleep and she's like, oh no, you can't tell when I fall asleep. I still look like I'm awake. I just don't remember what happened. So she explained to me what that actually was. So in the process, I'm learning about all these different disabilities and all these challenges and advantages, disadvantages. We talk about both and what they go through. So now, recognizing all these different combinations, I wanted you guys to work together in pairs in however many groups you want. You could do it by yourself. This is pretty flexible. But I just wanted you to take 5 minutes and do what we call the 100 problems activity. One of the students in my study did this in his freshman engineering class. They picked an object and then they had to find 100 problems with it. And he picked a door. He said he found about 75 problems with a normal door that they use. So you probably won't find 75 because I'm not giving you like a whole week to do this. But pick an object and think of all the different types of disabilities. It could be any project that you encounter or use on a daily basis. And how accessible is that object or technology? So we'll do a really quick report out from all the groups. So So tell me what you guys looked at, like what your object was and how many problems you found. So if you guys want to go first.
What did come to mind is just someone getting through, so that we're as a union, there are two sets of doors. And so part of it, I think that's difficult to navigate depending on whatever physical condition you have. If you're stepping up and pulling, so that could require a certain amount of coordination, although there is an accessible door. But the main doors, it could be the heaviness of the door, it could be a problem, and what else did we talk about? And that maybe the lighting, or just even, you don't see things until you have a condition like what you were saying about, you see what you can't do. And what is the problem once you have something wrong with your knee or something like that?
Yeah, and even with the accessible doors, even if you don't push the button, they're really hard to get open, and so universal design would be, it's easy to open for anybody, no matter who you are and what your condition or whatever mobility problem you may be having, or we also have a student in our study who has POTS, which is a blood pressure condition where if she stands up, basically her blood pressure is so low and it changes to where it doesn't actually pump her blood throughout her body. So gravity takes over and she'll pass out randomly. So there's all sorts of things that you can think about in terms of just a door. And I know David, the student, it's a pseudonym, the student who brought this to my attention, he's like, I sat and watched people use this door for like the whole week. He goes, so interesting when you just watch people, how many things you can find. So yeah, is there another group reporting out?
Why can't for our group?
Okay.
So we chose a phone, it's like a cell phone. We came up with, I have about 17 items, everything from the logistics of keeping it charged and keeping it on your person to the fact that, it can affect the way your body functions. So there's like the blue light that keeps you awake at night, and the electromagnetic waves that come from it, doing the work to keep it stored can affect you. And I don't necessarily read all some.
Right.
Quite a few.
Quite a few. Another group? Yeah.
We did a car, and on both sides of things like the physical issues that we found a bunch of them, like reaching the steering wheel or reaching the pedals, blind spots, how expensive it is to make most cars handicap accessible, and then also the issue of people parking like too close to them and things like that. But also the mental issue, like of people who have a fear of driving or a fear of riding in a car too.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Touch screens, which kind of goes with what she said about phones, because a lot of new cars have touch screens now, which can be.
Yeah, my husband does research in automated driving, and so we have a lot of talks about, particularly with my condition, like people who are blind or visually impaired, he's like, but that's one thing, he's like, I hate those screens, right there. It's like, so yeah. Yeah.
So we picked sidewalks. I'm not going to say the number for this because it'll be sad compared to April's. What we said about sidewalks is they're not smooth, so even people with a walking stick, like it's not smooth, it's not consistent. Wheelchairs and knee walkers, like you hit bumps and it hurts. I had surgery on my ankle and I was on a knee walker. You hit a bump and it hurts. Like the pressure shaking just hurts. Crutches on ice, you can just slide and fall. Falling in general because of inconsistencies. A sight challenge when you can't really see what the smooth or lack thereof of the surface. Crosswalk timing, some of us are able to cross quickly enough, but sometimes you need additional time to cross. Hills can be challenging regardless of if you're walking, crutches, wheelchair, what have you. Ample space, sometimes there's not enough space. And I would even tie that into mental. I know whenever I walk down the street, sometimes I mentally get challenged between saying, excuse me, quietly and politely enough to squeeze through versus like, excuse me, like I'm trying to get to a meeting and you're all congregating just standing there with us, excuse me, and move the heck out of the way.
Right.
So to me, I'm like arguing with myself over how do I say even excuse me in the most polite way to get them to move out of the way so I can keep walking.
And yeah, that's also, I mean, you guys have such great examples of universal design issues, because even like walking with my suitcase up here, I hit a bump and my suitcase just went boom onto the ground and I like, so yeah, I mean, even just on a suitcase, like, and so if you think about something where that you're constantly managing that, it does get very taxing. It takes a lot of energy. Did anybody else want to share? I don't want to cut anybody off if they want to. Yeah, go ahead.
So we got a laptop. Like physically, they can be kind of heavy to lift if you have that type of problem. Also, if you have like, any problems with your hands, they can be, it'd be a task for you to use it properly and type. Also, the lighting can be have a negative effect on somebody who's sensitive to light. Like also, we talked about like finances. Like, would you consider that a disability? Like, if you're a student, you really need a laptop, but when it comes to life, you're not able to attain that. Is that a disability for you?
I mean, that's something that we're thinking about a lot in our study right now. So one of the things students go into a lot, in general, it's known a lot of students go into engineering because they like math, they like science, it pays pretty well when you get done, it's a pretty useful major to have, you can do a lot with it. And one of the students in our study who I spoke to last semester, I mean, she explicitly made that connection. I like math and science, but I know when I get done I'll have a job because I know with my disability, it's gonna be very financially taxing on me in the future, and so this was one way that I could try to provide financial stability for myself was to go into engineering. So that's definitely a lot of things that the students in our study are bringing up as I talk to them more and learn more about them. So yeah, that's a great point. All right. So one thing too, going kind of towards this more intermittent, gradual disability dimension, we have Darren, who is a civil engineering sophomore. He's a non-trad. He's actually a veteran, and he suffered from a traumatic brain injury while he was at war. And so one of the interesting things was he's like, I was in a bombing, like our vehicle hit a landmine and exploded, and he's like, I thought I was fine. Like, he goes, I got knocked out and stuff. But he's like, I got up, I was fine. He's like, everybody was okay. But then he started to realize the significance of his disability once he started school. And so here he says, now that I'm in school, I know that I'm struggling with things that I never used to struggle with as far as learning issues. I guess you could call it a learning disability, basically. What it really boils down to for me is retaining any information and then being able to reapply that information later on in an exam or something like that, and having complete memory blankouts. And finally, he says, bad brain days is what I call them. And so for him, school, just the environment of school and going to school and how we structure what school is, was something that Darren really struggled with. When I asked him, do you have accommodations or anything? He said, no. He goes, I don't know if it's worth the effort to get it, because he's like, I just record it and then I go back to it later. And in those points of the interview, like, I don't interject or anything, and but mostly I want to know, do they have accommodations? If so, what are they? And what are some of the things that they're thinking about in terms of not requesting certain types of accommodations? So that's another thing we talk about too. So then we're also getting another thread that we're really seeing is managing societal expectations of disability. So here we have Johnny, who is a recent graduate of civil engineering. He had a job ready to go, and he has ADHD. And when I talked to him, we talked a lot about like the perception of if you have a learning disability, you're automatically going to do poorly in school. And so when we were talking, he he talked about more often than not, my peers are like, did you drop the class? Why aren't you in the exam? Why weren't you in the room taking it with us? And he said people would always question. He said I'd explain my disability to them, and then people wouldn't believe me in school. I have learning disability, and they'd say, Johnny, you're right on homework. Why do you have to do that? Because he got really high grades. And he said the hard part was explaining it to my peers. A lot of my peers would never really accept that, really. So we talked a lot about, even as someone who is successful, which is what the point of accommodations are, is to equalize the chances of student success in academia. His peers were just like, you get good grades, you don't have a learning disability, you don't need those things. So he was constantly sticking up for himself on that. This also kind of goes back on professors too, and how we present our content and how we interact with our students regarding accommodations. So Johnny also said, sometimes my professors would actually send me back to the resource center to get extra verification that I wasn't trying to cheat or something. So there's, going back to the stigma that you guys mentioned earlier, there is this stigma of disability in engineering. This was also echoed by Derek. And he said, I feel like teachers in most cases feel that it's more of me trying to cheat the system or trying to get an extra advantage versus them trying to be accommodating regarding my accommodations. And so Derek, in our interview, these are all conducted virtually, and if students have disabilities where that's not possible, we work something else out. But for the most part, they've been virtually through Skype and Zoom and things like that. But he took his accommodations letter and he like put it up to the screen and was like, Cass, this is what my accommodation letter says. I get to up to twice the amount of time on exams. His professor actually said, you get up to that amount. So if I want to give you an hour and 5 minutes on an hour exam, that's up to me. And so it was a very hostile environment for him just to get his accommodations. And so this whole concept of like cheating and engineering being hard, you know, these are things that we're really starting to question in our study, how we as departments, how we as faculty, how we as students, how all of us kind of conceptualize what it is to be an engineer and what engineering is in school. So the words that you see here are actual words that the students in the study describe engineering as. You know, what did you think about civil engineering before you started? Oh, it's challenging, it's hard, it's difficult, it's rigorous. No one has officially said sacrifice, but how they describe that is, oh, if I just put in the time and stay up really late a lot, and I'll just get a good job later and everything will be fine later. It's seen as a sacrifice. And so really, students take pride in that. Even students without disabilities, you know, it's like, I'm an engineer, I'm really smart, depending on who you talk to. I mean, we know some students who are like that. And so really what we're looking at here is kind of, we're finding that students see these accommodations as a mitigation of that. You know, my accommodations make it less hard, and they actually regulate their own use of accommodations because of these perceptions that they're constantly managing, like Derek, like Johnny. So here, David, he has autism, he's a freshman, at least last semester, last year he was a freshman, we're still talking, and so he's still in the study. But I asked him about his accommodations. He said, I really only use it when I have to, because if I'm already really good at it, and taking the accommodations kind of feels like cheating at that point. This whole cheating concept keeps coming back, and it's something that's emergent, that students use the word cheat. And so that's something that's really been fascinating. A lot of students, though, some of them that I've talked to in terms of accommodations, particularly if they have a learning disability, they're conscious about which professors are better at providing accommodations, what classes they'll need accommodations. Some students will look at the structure of the class and say, there's no timed exams in this class, there's only projects, so I should be fine. I don't disclose that. And so really in terms of accommodations, it's regarding any type of disability, really it's coming down to this disclosure piece of it and balancing this difficulty and this rigor and this like, you know, you should be able to stay up all night mentality that students have. I mean, I was that way in undergrad too. Like, it's like, oh, I'm going to work really hard during the week and I'm going to party really hard during the weekend and I'm never ever going to sleep except when I go home for Christmas break and I'll sleep for 3 days in a row. That's not sustainable for anybody, you know, and so kind of thinking about that. And so going back to Derek, you know, he said, so already from the get-go at the beginning of the semester, instead of feeling like I can come to you and talk to you, you already feel like I'm not trustworthy and that I'm going to pull a fast one over you. So that's really something particularly with this group of students, because the majority of them have non-apparent disabilities. They're really experiencing pushback in different areas and different aspects of their university experience. Throughout this study, we explicitly talk about disability as an identity dimension and as an experience because of how it is lived. It's a lived experience. It's not something that just happens. It's something you go through. It varies. It's, you know, and if it's a temporary disability, it's gone after a while. You know, you might have arthritis in the joint that you had, but you still might have arthritis in the joint that you had surgery on, you know, things like that. So really quick, I wanted to go over the difference between accommodations and accessibility. So we talked a lot about accommodations where it's an individual adaptation to a course. And one thing that we're trying to really shift the dialogue in engineering education is going back to this universal design activity that you guys did and moving more towards accessibility. Excuse me. So even when I was putting this presentation together, I was like, if I had to use a screen reader, I don't yet, but it's like if I had a screen reader, I wouldn't know what half of this says because my PowerPoint's not accessible. So if you guys wanted this presentation, I would have to go through, add alt text, describe things, and make an accessible version of it. And so really we're trying to shift from an individual adaptation to where an instructor would already include this universal design aspect in their courses, and you wouldn't necessarily need accommodations as much, or, you know, or you would have people that could help you, you know, on campus make your courses more accessible. So this is, again, what we're trying to move towards. At the bottom, I have a list, I have a resource that you guys can visit. University of Washington has the Do It program, and I can send you resources and things on the presentation to Natalia if you guys want access to it. We'll make that happen. So now, for the remainder of our time, I really wanted us to do a reflection. So I wanted you guys to look through your worksheet. You have your identities, you have, you know, these conceptions of disability that you had coming in, you have the problems that you identified in the activity, and then now what are some of the things that we can do to make teaching practices more accessible? You know, if you're a student and you have ideas, yes, we want them. And just to make really the university experience more accessible. So some of the questions that I wanted you guys to think about while you were talking through these, you can talk in groups again, or if you want to do it, you know, by yourself, particularly if you're reflecting on kind of your own identities and how that influences you. But how have your perceptions changed since the start of this seminar? How have you managed accommodations in the past? Have you had any requests? For staff, you know, what are your interactions with faculty in terms of accommodations? Do you know about them, depending on what office you come from? And then in terms of teaching, you know, what practices, you know, do faculty tend to use that are not as accessible, and what could we do to make them more accessible? So we'll just go through and we'll talk about these things, and we'll come back and kind of have a wrap up in about 15 minutes or so. What are some of the things that you guys talked about in your groups? And it doesn't, since we have a mix of people, it doesn't necessarily have to be directed towards disability, but I'm kind of curious about some of the things that stuck out at you guys in terms of, you know, whether you're teaching a class or a student in a class or your interactions, you know, with accommodations and things. What are some of the things that you guys talked about? Yeah.
I would like to see more disability awareness campus-wide as opposed to, I think it's everybody's responsibility, not just the disability office. And so then that makes people look at accessibility issues, not like that's their issue, teaching is my issue.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a great point. So talking about disability awareness campus-wide. So it's kind of this joint thing, not like I'm siphoned into this area, that's not my thing, I don't do it. So that was one of the comments. Yeah.
I kind of almost had something along those lines where I said we should, almost like what we're doing today, educate faculty and staff, so that kind of bridge the gap between age, culture, whatever, so we can have less of the stigma. And if we know more about what people might be going through, then we can better address the needs. So yeah, the campus-wide sessions like this would be great if faculty and more staff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely, you know, I feel like I'm kind of preaching to the choir here in many ways. Like, you know, you guys are interested in it. This is something that you know, are striving to do well at and learn more about constantly. So yeah, just having those types of things. And I think also, like, part of that, Deanna and I were talking a little bit about those different identity dimensions, having that self-awareness of who you are and recognizing that. And also recognizing, you know, bringing kind of the human back into engineering. You know, we tend to think that it's very objective and it's, you know, a meritocracy. And that's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes there's other things that are going on that students are dealing with. And so bringing that awareness into it as well. So kind of getting at these bigger cultural things and educating, you know, and expanding what we're thinking about it. Any other? Oh, yeah.
I'm in the event planner for the school, and I've had a couple of graduations where we've had to build a handicap ramp and different things like that. Actually, at the Veterans Museum, which is interesting that they're not already accessible. But if people don't tell me, then I don't know. There are things that I've been able to accommodate our guests. There was one that was visually impaired and needed to sit close to the stage. We were really able to take care of that. Some sign language interpreters were needed a couple different years. And then, as I said, that ramp that was built for a different way to get on stage, different things like that I can't accommodate people don't know about. And the person earlier that you mentioned that didn't identify as disabled or didn't feel comfortable using that term, I feel like wouldn't put any special needs down on my spreadsheet that says, hey, if you have any special needs, please let us know. And then I would be able to accommodate them, which goes back to your point, because they don't tell me they can't help.
Yeah, and and that's where it gets really complex. Like, you know, between, because even on like, so I'm applying for positions. You know, I'm a postdoc now. I'm applying for faculty positions. They have that question of, do you have a disability? And I'm just like, I don't know. Like, you know, how significant? And so it's this whole assessment process, and a lot of it too is that person thinking, you know. Even sometimes it's like, how is this significant enough? Like, am I blind enough? Am I seeing, you know, am I hearing impaired enough? You know, and so there's this whole question of enough that also complicates that and influences how people identify and disclose to others. So, was there any other? Oh, yeah.
Another one, if that's okay, what did I? Oh, you did. No, go ahead.
It's like whoever wants to go next, I'm seeing.
I have a experience as both a student and a TA. So I've taught and taken classes in the same classroom. And as a student, my classroom is really always accessible to me. So whether it's getting around, basically being able to see and things like that. And now that I'm in the teaching role, the podium itself is very accessible.
Yeah, that's such a, I'm gonna check time quick and we'll then finish up, because that's a great segue. We often also don't think about faculty with disabilities in addition to students with disabilities. And so one of the things that like we've been talking about even in our research team, so the team working on this project, there's 5 of us and 4 of us identify as individuals with disabilities ranging from amputee, visual impairment. One of our researchers has a crooked spine, I believe, and can't sit, and just, you know, and so there's all these different things that we're all managing in different ways. So it's really making us think about, you know, how we approach the research, how we approach our teaching, and how institutionally is that supported or not supported in other cases. So this leads into things that you can do today. So one thing, I wanted to give a call out to the Disability Resources and Services Office, and because this is a fairly intuitive thing, but there's a lot of faculty who don't know where that office is on their campus, and they're called different things at different campuses. Find out what ADA services are available. Faculty typically fall under ADA, where students fall under the services office. Grad students are really interesting because you're both an employee and a student. So that can get a little tricky depending on where you're at. Use your sheet. Keep those sheets, reflect back on them when you're in these different situations. The other big thing is just listening to students. I find now, I was telling Deanna this, I'm a lot more patient with my students and myself. Like, one of the questions that I ask my students is like, I can't see your presentations even when I'm sitting at the front of class. Can you just give me a full page printout of your presentation? And if they can't, you know, then I just say, well, send it to me and I'll do it. But actually, all the students I've had, they're like, oh yeah, no problem. We'll just print a bigger version of it for you. So they're really great there. But again, goes back to disclosure. I disclose to them in class what these things are. And the other big thing is if you don't understand an accommodation, ask the office. A lot of times we have, a lot of the students we've interviewed have faculty who don't know what an accommodation is, and so then they're just hesitant to do it, and there's a lot of pushback. So as a final ending quote from one of our participants, Molly, she's fantastic. Her quote at the end of our first interview, she said, design isn't just physical things. The design of how you run your class, the social structure of our society is design. Basically, everything is designed. I think in order to be more inclusive in design, you need people who aren't already included to be designers. So with that, thank you all so much. We're right on time. Thank you guys. I have cards if anybody wants cards. And yeah, Natalia has my contact information.